So coming up not this weekend, but next weekend is going to be UFC Fight Night Lewis versus Teixeira, headlined of course by Derrick Lewis and Tallison Teixeira. This event is going to be taking place in Nashville, Tennessee in front of a crowd, and it's a little bit of a polarizing one. I think some people look at this card and they absolutely love the card. For me personally, I look at this card and honestly think it's one of the weaker cards that we have had in front of a crowd for a while now. However, I will say I think there isn't a lot of opportunity for finishes, and when you put good, exciting fighters in front of crowds, you typically do get good, exciting fights with finishes. We've seen that time and time and time again, and I think that this card isn't really going to be much of an exception. You may notice that I have actually put some graphics together for this card, and of course, more cards going forward, I will use graphics as well. Probably the Contender Series too. I do think when I'm really busy though, kind of with outside of YouTube stuff, I might have to go back to using Tapology, but for all UFC cards going forward, you can expect some graphics in some form of another. It did take me a while to put together, over an hour for the card, if you can believe it, but hopefully they look all good, and hopefully you do enjoy the video a little bit more than if I was using Tapology. Couple of things though before we do get into it. We want picks. If you do want to sign up using my code Austen, you do get 10% off your first membership. Last week, I did an Octagon card, I did a Cage Warriors card, I did a PFL card, and I will be doing PFL Europe. I don't think I'm going to cover PFL MENA this weekend coming because I don't really like PFL MENA as a product personally. I'm much more interested in PFL Europe, but we will see how the week kind of goes by. I do have something on this weekend, so probably will just cover PFL Europe. Another thing as well that I want to mention is I'm pretty close to 10,000 subscribers, and I know I have been pushing that button, pushing the subscribe button a lot recently, but we are pretty close, and I have appreciated all of the support that everyone has given me recently, and I really would appreciate your support now, because actually, unfortunately, I hate to play the pity card, but I'm going to, because this actually really upset me. My car got broken into, and all of my boxing gear got stolen. If you guys may or may not know, I actually was an amateur boxer, and I did fight in amateur boxing, and my shoes, my boxing boots, my boxing gloves, and my bag were stolen, and that was actually the gear that I wore at my fight. So it kind of sucks that I've lost all evidence, really, of that fight, aside from the medal that I won, so that kind of sucks. So I hate to pull the pity card, but if you could please subscribe, I really would appreciate it. We'll now get into my predictions for this card. So the first fight is going to be between Mike Davis and Mitch Ramirez, and honestly, I think that this is a pretty interesting matchup, even though Mike Davis is minus 900, which I actually do relatively disagree with these odds. I think Mike Davis should definitely be the favorite. He is my pick to win the fight. I am pretty confident he wins the fight, but I'm not minus 900 favorite. I don't just see Mike Davis going out there against Ramirez and just beating him up from start to finish and just dominating the matchup, which is what you do typically expect from someone with odds this wide. But Mike Davis is a good fighter. He is very inactive. He did lose his debut to Gilbert Burns, but ever since then, went on a pretty strong win streak. Lost recently to Friziam in a matchup he actually got out-wrestled in, and Friziam is kind of proving himself to be a pretty solid fighter out of France right now. But Davis typically is the one doing the wrestling and finding a lot of success with both his striking and also his grappling as well. Got a submission win over Natan Levy there in the second round, which is pretty good considering Natan Levy can kind of do pretty good striking and grappling himself. But typically, Mike Davis does kind of fight to his strengths and his opponent's weaknesses. He did really lean heavily on the wrestling against Vyacheslav Borchev, but that's not really something that Mike Davis does all the time. He can strike quite well as well. We've seen it against Mason Jones, which was a good performance from him. And I think that kind of wherever the fight goes, he's going to be comfortable, especially when you do take on Mitch Ramirez. Now, Mitch Ramirez is a pretty interesting prospect. He did, of course, fight at 170 pounds for a pretty decent amount of time, and he actually does have a couple very good wins on the regional scene, such as a very solid performance over Jeremy Holloway. He does have a lot of power on the feet, but in my opinion, I don't think that that power has really translated to the highest level of the sport, and I do think that I would consider him to be more of a wrestler than a striker. He does fight very well with leg kicks. He actually has a finish by leg kicks as well, which is quite impressive. But the thing about Mike Davis is I think he's going to keep the pressure on, and I think he's going to be able to work takedowns and eventually win this fight. I actually am picking Mike Davis to win this fight by decision, or maybe a late finish as well. I think at a minus 900 price tag though, very surprised the odds are so wide. And now we can move up to the heavyweight division with Kennedy Njokuani taking on Valter Walker. And I actually like Kennedy Njokuani in this matchup. Now, the thing about Kennedy Njokuani is he has been and can be very, very inconsistent. Now, we did see this a lot more at 205 pounds when he was fighting at light heavyweight. But sometimes he shows up and looks good, and then sometimes he shows up and he just doesn't throw volume. He just doesn't really kind of do anything. I do think against Valter Walker, though, I think he's going to have a pretty significant striking advantage. As long as he can keep the fight on the feet, I think Nzechukwu should be pretty fine. Valter Walker is a very talented grappler. He is actually the brother of Johnny Walker, of course, so they do share, of course, the same genetics. He's 6'6" with a 78.5-inch reach. But unlike Johnny Walker, Valter Walker just doesn't really have the same athleticism, and he certainly does not have the same level of striking. Now, in the UFC, he has had a lot of success with his grappling. 2 heel hooks back-to-back in the heavyweight division is very impressive. But if you do go to the regional scene and his UFC debut against Lucas Bursky and Alex Nicholson, that striking really did get exposed quite badly by those opponents. And I do think as long as Njokuani can keep the fight on the feet against Valter Walker, it's going to be Njokuani's wheelhouse to work. You know, he moved up to 265 pounds after a couple pretty bad losses to Ovince St. Preux and Dustin Jacoby by knockout in the first round. And he looked good. He got a round 1 finish over Barnett, dominated Barnett, got another round 1 finish against Bursky, dominated Bursky. I can't guarantee another round 1 KO for Njokuani, but I do believe that the fight, as long as it's on the feet, Njokuani's going to look good, and I think he is going to land big. So I'm going to pick Njokuani to win by knockout. Probably in round 2 is my pick, but maybe we see a third round 1 knockout in a row for the former light heavyweight and the African savage, Kennedy Njokuani. Now, Chris Curtis is coming down to 170 pounds, and his first fight at 170 in the UFC is going to be Max Griffin. Now, Chris Curtis has kind of been a career welterweight. He's fought a lot of his fights at 170 pounds, but when he got into the UFC for the first time, he came in on short notice at 185 against Phil Hawes, coming in short notice again at 185 pounds against Brendan Allen. And I think from there, he just decided he was going to stick at 185 pounds because he was finding so much success. But if you do go to his recent performances, he has come off a couple of close performances, wins and losses, and especially losses recently to Kopylov and Brendan Allen. I think now he's kind of realized that maybe if he wants to make another run potentially into the rankings again, maybe hit 170 pounds is going to be his best bet. And maybe it is, because he does have a very unique, very heavy boxing style that we have seen proven to work at 170 pounds. And I do believe Max Griffin is going to be a pretty good test for Curtis in this kind of spot here. And I think that it is a very winnable matchup for Curtis in here as well. Max Griffin is a very pressure forward fighter. He is actually a guy that can give very talented fighters problems. I would actually say that he gave Michael Morales some problems, and we can see how well that performance has truly aged. Max Griffin, he comes forward, he does shoot at takedowns on occasion, but in my opinion, I don't think his takedown offense is going to be strong enough to take Curtis down. Curtis has shown very strong takedown defense throughout really his entire career in the UFC at 185 pounds. And I think that for the most part, I do strongly favor Curtis's boxing on the feet. The problem with Curtis, though, is that we have seen him get very frustrated in matchups before. When things don't go his way, he does kind of just start to complain. He doesn't give up. That's definitely not the right thing to say, but he does really kind of seems like it shakes him quite a lot. And it doesn't really start to fight the same sort of guy to a game plan or something that he's got set up. But as long as Chris Curtis is the one, I think dealing with the pressure of Griffin and landing his boxing combinations and working the body, which he does do very well. He does actually that better than most fighters in the UFC, I think. I think Curtis should be fine against an aging Max Griffin now at this point in his career. I do like Curtis. I like the move to 170 pounds if he can make it safely. And I think that the unique boxing style that he does have is going to translate relatively well to this weight class. And we were just talking about inconsistent fighters with Kennedy Njokuani, and I do believe that Jake Matthews falls under that category as well. At only 30 years old, Jake Matthews is a veteran of the UFC now with 21 fights. under the UFC banner in a 14-7 record. Very, very impressive for Jake Matthews there. He is very kind of underrated, I think, in that sort of area of how long he actually has spent in the promotion. But he has had some good performances and he has had some bad performances as well. If you guys do remember, Andre Fialho truly was exposed for the first time by Jake Matthews. He knocked him out, he boxed up, he looked incredible. And then in his next fight, he fought against Matthew Semmelsberger, and he was the one getting boxed up. He was the one getting hurt. He was the one having the bad performance. And I think kind of from there, I kind of maybe a little bit hesitant into picking Jake Matthews with confidence in his matchups. But Jake Matthews, he started out as a grappler, and the boxing and the striking really, really improved over time. And I think we can now kind of see Jake Matthews as a truly complete fighter with good boxing to back up some pretty solid grappling as well. Chidi Njokuani is actually a guy that came into the UFC at 185 pounds and then come down to 170 pounds relatively recently. He is a guy that has had a very long career now, 35 professional fights at 36 years old, a career in Bellator before coming over to the UFC, even had the fight on the Contender Series, of course, against Contender Series legend Mario Souza, who's fought for the Contender Series like 3 times now. But after a little bit of a losing streak at 185 pounds, I think he took a little bit of a risk. He come down to 170. He beat Reese McKee in a pretty solid performance for him. And then after that, he's kind of started to look pretty solid. He recently knocked out Alessio Zaleski. He did unfortunately miss weight in that matchup by 1.5 pounds, which is unfortunate to see because he is now getting older. Cutting that weight is not going to get any easier, but hopefully he can make weight at 170 pounds here in this fight. Njokuani stands at 6'3" with an 80-inch reach. He uses it well. He's got a very, very strong Muay Thai style. It wasn't that long ago that we saw Njokuani actually finding a lot of success against Gregory Rodriguez, and we've seen Gregory Rodriguez now main event a fight night in front of Jared Cannonier, and recently just got their massive KO at UFC 317. I think in this fight, if Chidi Njokuani can control the distance, he's going to be the one scoring points in this matchup. Jake Matthews, though, is actually a very pressure-forward guy when he lets his hands go. So maybe that sort of boxing style could disrupt Chidi Njokuani and what he wants to try and do. But I still do like Njokuani in this matchup. He's a slight favorite. He's a guy that I do trust a little bit more than Matthews. I know that Matthews has recently gone on a bit of a win streak himself, but I do like Njokuani now at 170 pounds. I think he's been looking pretty good. And maybe if Matthews comes in here with a heavy wrestling grappling style, that could be interesting because we haven't really seen Njokuani have to deal with a grappler, aside from Zaleski, of course, but he's more of a capoeira striker at 170 pounds yet. I'm going to be picking Chidi Njokuani to win this matchup by decision against Jake Matthews. And now we have another very big favorite on this card, and honestly, that is a little bit of a theme of the card. Very, very wide odds, and given the fact that these fights are 2 weeks away, typically the odds get even wider, and honestly, it almost gets to the point sometimes where the entire card is unplayable. But Fatima Kline is minus 1,000 in this matchup to defeat Melissa Martinez, and I will be honest with you guys, I do think Fatima Kline wins. I do think Fatima Kline finds a finish, but the odds, they are getting a little bit crazy. Now, stylistically, this is a very, very good matchup for Fatima Kline to find a lot of success. She is a pretty big fighter at 115 pounds. She is an elite grappler and very solid wrestler. She did find her first loss in her professional career to Jasmine Desudavicius, who she did take on short notice, and in my opinion gave a pretty good fight before she did gas out. Then she did fight at 115 pounds and she didn't knock out, but she TKO'd Victoria Dudakova in the second round, and Dudakova proved herself to be a pretty solid wrestler at 115 pounds. Melissa Martinez is a former kickboxing world champion, but in my opinion in the UFC, hasn't looked incredible so far. She took about 3 years off in between her Combate fight and her debut in the UFC and lost to Elise Reed, and then took another 2 years off before fighting Alice Ardaline, and she did beat her, but Alice Ardaline, I know she got a win recently, but she's not that good. Martinez is very small for the weight class, 115 pounds. She's a pure striker. I don't love the fact that she is a striker taking on a very, very good grappler. I know she is the sister of David Martinez, who is just a sick prospect at bantamweight, but I do think that Kline goes out there, gets the takedown, and gets the submission in this matchup relatively early on into the fight. And speaking of wide odds, we've got more of them with Eduarda Moura as a very, very big favorite here, minus 650 over Lauren Murphy, who is coming back after 2 years away from the sport. Honestly, I could not tell you why she hasn't fought for 2 years, because she is going to be nearly 42 years old when she steps into that cage against Eduarda Moura next weekend. The thing about Lauren Murphy is, though, she kind of does have a couple very odd performances in her career. Yes, she got smoked by Valentina Shevchenko, but she took about a year off after that, and then come back and out-wrestled Miesha Tate. Out-wrestled Miesha Tate. Everyone was gassing up Tate's wrestling at this period of time, and Murphy out-wrestled her. It was just a truly, truly eye-opening and confusing performance, I will admit. But then she lost to Andrade, and she just disappeared. We haven't seen her, and now she's back after 2 years, taking on Eduarda Moura, who was a former strawweight, but she just couldn't make weight. She missed weight twice at 115 pounds in the UFC. So I believe she was forced up to 125. And I think that now she's at 125. I think she's going to be a prospect to look out for. Moura on the feet is very stiff. I don't really love her striking, but I do really like her grappling. She's very, very heavy on top with control once she does get the takedown. She does have submission ability from top control. She does have ground and pound ability from top control. I think that Moura can kind of do just a bit of everything, really, once the fight gets down to the ground. As long as the fight's on the feet, though, maybe Murphy can make things interesting, but honestly, I just don't trust a 42-year-old Murphy at this point in her career. I'm going to pick Eduarda Moura. I'm going to pick Eduarda Moura by finish, either by ground and pound, but more likely is going to be a submission, maybe an arm triangle choke. And now we have a man that needs to be put in front of a crowd every single one of his fights. It is Nate the Train back against Morgan Charriere. And I will be honest, this is kind of like a people's fight. Like, this is a banger. This is a fun fight. Both of these guys should throw down on the feet, and I think that we can expect maybe not a finish, but we can definitely expect a fight of the night, potential type of fight out of these two guys. Nate Landwehr, I love Nate Landwehr. I think everyone loves Nate Landwehr. Cardio machine, a bit of a wrestling machine as well if he wants to go there, but for the most part, he does like to stand and bang, and he has very, very fun post-fight interviews. Morgan Charriere is a pure striker. You're not really going to see Charriere do anything more than that. We have seen him grapple before, but it's definitely not really something I would say is like his strengths. You know what I mean? I think Charriere definitely finds most of his success when it does come down to the striking. Against Nate Landwehr, I do think that Charriere is going to have a striking advantage, and I think that he is going to be able to use it here against Landwehr, who does have wrestling, but I just don't really know if it's going to be good enough to really just truly topple over Morgan Charriere. You know what I mean? The thing about Nate Landwehr, though, is he can get pretty aggressive. He can throw down. He can land with power. He's got a big knockout over Jamal Emmers, which is impressive. And another thing as well about Nate Landwehr too is that he does have cardio, as I did mention before. He did outlast a very tough round against David Onama, and then was able to take over in round 2 and round 3 after that. Nate Landwehr's fun, man. He's always going to be fun, but I do think this technical striking edge to Charriere. Charriere does work the body very, very well with his kicks and his punches. And as I said, he can grapple. He just doesn't really do it that often. But we have seen him get takedowns on Cage Warriors and control with top control in fights like that. He can be low volume at times, which could be concerning. But I think that Nate Landwehr is going to put a bit of a volume sort of pace on him in round 1, which probably should kick Charriere into gear and make Charriere throw a little bit more volume and make this fight an absolute epic banger. I'm picking Morgan Charriere. I'm picking Morgan Charriere, and I'm picking Morgan Charriere to win this fight by decision. I know a lot of people are going to be on Charriere by KO. Just for now, I am leaning the decision side for Charriere. Nate the Train, though, always going to be fun. Nate the Train in the USA. Nate the Train in the UFC. And now we go all the way back up to 205 pounds for Junior Tafa's light heavyweight debut as he does take on Tuco Tokkos. A little bit of a clash of styles here. Striker in Tafa, grappler in Tokkos. Now, this is honestly not the highest level fight we're ever going to see in the UFC, but I do actually think it could be quite fun. I do worry a little bit about Tafa going down to 205 pounds, as I genuinely don't actually think that that's really like the best move that he can possibly make, because guys at 205 pounds are faster, they're more athletic, and typically they do just kind of have like better pure grappling than guys at 265 pounds. And that's something that Tafa's going to need to worry about, because Tafa, former glory kickboxer, not just any kickboxer, guys, a former top 10 glory kickboxer in the heavyweight division, and he actually had a pretty successful kickboxing career before coming over to the UFC. Now, I will admit the UFC career hasn't been great. He is 2-3 in the promotion, but he did have a very good performance against Sean Sharaf in his last fight at heavyweights, and he did get a legendary win over the legendary Parker Porter, who I believe actually won a BKFC fight recently, which is kind of awesome. But Junior Tafa, he just doesn't really have good takedown defense. We saw that against Muhammad Usman. We've seen it even against Valter Walker there, where he got heel hooked, and it was somewhat controversial, but it kind of wasn't at the same time. And Tuco Tokkos is a wrestler, and that's what's going to make things interesting, is the fact that Tuco Tokkos, I do believe, is going to lean on the wrestling here. Tokkos is now 0-2 in the UFC, and I believe that if he loses to Junior Tafa in this matchup, I think that his career very much in the UFC could potentially be on the line. So I think that Tuco Tokkos is going to come into this matchup with a very wrestling heavy game plan to make the fight take to the ground, and then he can maybe get the win. However, I just do think that when the fight is on the feet, and I know Tuco Tokkos didn't get knocked out by Navajo Sterling, I think that Tafa is still going to have a big striking advantage. The thing, though, between the guys and between Navajo Sterling and Junior Tafa, is they have different sort of styles. Navajo Sterling's more of a PCU, apart, kind of work from range kind of guy. Tafa, his nickname is the Juggernaut. He is a Juggernaut. He just comes forward, absolutely bombing hooks. You watch his glory kickboxing fights, he's just bombing hooks. He's not throwing kicks. Glory kickboxing, minus the kicks. And just bombing hooks away, and he's just throwing down, man. The problem with throwing down and just overthrowing strikes like that, though, is if Tuco Tokkos can time a strike correctly of Tafa's, he should be able to duck under it and get Tafa off balance and take him down, which is going to be very concerning. I think a very sweaty fight if you are going to put money on this one, which I honestly just don't recommend you do, personally. There's another thing about Tafa, too, is he's going to have to make 205 pounds. Tafa at 205 pounds was always the rumor. Everyone was saying that Tafa was going to fight at 205 when the UFC signed him, but he's stuck at heavyweight for a bit. Found some success, I guess, 2 wins, which is pretty impressive, but 205 pounds, he's going to have to cut weight. He weighed in at 241 pounds in his matchup at heavyweight last time, so it'll be interesting to see how he's going to cut to 205. Like, is he going to lose body fat? Is he actually just going to try and physically cut the water out of his body and still maintain the body fat? I don't really know what his plan is to get to 205, but I'm intrigued. I personally prefer a Tafa at 265 pounds. I think that kind of just like his brother, he's a guy that can be a guy that just knocks out the lower sort of level guys at heavyweight. But maybe Tafa at 205 pounds is going to be a different beast. Maybe he's going to hit harder compared to the guys at 205. Maybe he gets a knockout here. I kind of hope he does, because I actually am going to be picking Junior Tafa by knockout in this matchup. I just worry about the takedown defense, because we've seen that it's non-existent. Tuco Tokkos isn't a small guy either. He's 6'4". At this weight class, he's a tough guy too. He had some tough shots from Navajo Sterling, man. He really did. So it'll be interesting to see this matchup. I'm intrigued. I'm Tafa gang all the way. I do love Tafa gang, and I do believe that Tafa does win this matchup by knockout. However, if Tuco Tokkos gets a takedown in round 1, I think we just panic. I think we panic. And now we have Calvin Kattar taking on Steve Garcia. And I will be honest, guys, I just genuinely am not 100% sure how Kattar's surname is pronounced, because even the commentary pronounces it 2 different ways during his fights. But I think that this is a good opportunity for Steve Garcia to really put himself in the rankings properly. Kattar at this point is on a 4-fight losing streak. He hasn't won since 2022 when he beat Giga Chikadze. I know that he had a close fight against Josh Emmett, which I thought he won, which I think the world thought he won, but ever since then, he's kind of just not really been the same since the injury to Arnold Owen. He had a bad performance against Aljamain Sterling, who was just really boring and out-wrestled him the whole time. And then Yusuf Zalal kind of did the same thing and really kind of took the 3rd round off after winning the first 2 rounds. And Steve Garcia is a little bit more exciting than Yusuf Zalal is, in my opinion. Steve Garcia is 6 foot tall at 145 pounds, and he is on a win streak, man. I will be honest, at one point, I didn't believe in Garcia. I thought that this guy had no chin, which I still do worry about the chin, because Charlie Ontiveros knocked him down twice. Mahashati Hayasea took years off his life, but kind of ever since then, he's been on an absolute streak, and he's looking good, man. A win over Chase Hooper has aged incredibly well. That was a beat down as well. A win over Malquizal Costa has aged pretty well as well. A win over Sungwoo Choi, doesn't really do much for me, but still a good win because he did it on the feet. And then Kyle Nelson as well was on a win streak too when he ran into Steve Garcia. Garcia is well-rounded though. He's not just a striker. He can wrestle as well. And I think that's where he's probably going to need to find the most success against Calvin Kattar in this matchup, because Kattar, he's a boxer. We all know that he's a boxer. So I think that we see Steve Garcia kind of use his height advantage here. Only very slight height advantage, but I think it's going to be important because he kicks pretty regularly, and Kattar doesn't really is truly a boxer. He kind of sticks to that. So I think that Garcia is going to strike from range here, and it's going to give him opportunities to actually set up takedowns maybe in the future as well as the rounds do go on. Kattar has shown that the takedown defense hasn't really held up against more elite wrestlers. I would say that Yusuf Zalal is a better wrestler purely than Garcia, but he doesn't have the size that Garcia does. And I would also say that once again, sort of same story with Sterling. We know that Sterling, how good he is, right? But also, once again, was able to truly out-wrestle Calvin. If it's going to be a striking match, I do worry about the chin. I do. I think that is something to worry about for sure. But I just think that just given the styles, man, Steve Garcia is fast too at 145 pounds. He's going to be faster than a 37-year-old Calvin Kattar. And I think this is going to be an opportunity for Steve Garcia to maybe get a knockout that has been set up from the takedowns earlier in the fight and really cement himself as a contender in the rankings. Steve Garcia is minus 140. I think he gets it done. I think he gets it done probably by late finish or decision. I don't think that we're going to see a Steve Garcia round 1 KO situation here, in my opinion. Now, speaking of weight class changes, we've had Eduarda Moura. We've also had Junior Tafa going down to 205 pounds. And for Vitor Petrino, we have a man going up a weight class here. He was fighting at 205 pounds, was finding a lot of success, and now he's going up to 265 pounds to fight at heavyweight. And I'm actually quite intrigued by this move because he actually was genuinely looking like a very good prospect at 205 pounds at one point. He was on a 4-fight win streak within the UFC. He was 11-0 within the UFC. He ran into Anthony Smith was the guy that fraud checked him, if you can believe it, and Dustin Jacoby. But in that matchup against Anthony Smith, he put himself in that guillotine. I don't think guys at 265 pounds are going to be pulling guillotine like Anthony Smith was able to in that fight. Vitor Petrino started out his career as a striker. This guy was getting round 1 KOs left, right, and center on the regional scene, and then knocked out Rodolfo Bellato, and he come into UFC and become D1 Vitor. He become a wrestler, and he out-wrestled Anton Tokkos, which is actually pretty impressive, I think. And from there, just kind of really set up all of his finishes and his performances with the wrestling. It didn't work against the higher level guys at 205 pounds, but now he's fighting one of the lower level guys at 265 pounds in Austen Lane. Austen Lane is a big guy, former NFL player, if I'm not mistaken, definitely is a pretty good athlete at 6'6", and he does move relatively fast on his feet. The problem with Lane, though, is when it comes to the striking, he throws a combination and he will stand in the pocket and then he'll move out. So he gives his opponents opportunities to knock him out. And we've seen him knocked out. We've seen Janasa Denise knock him out, who's a very slow heavyweight. We saw that against Hines. We saw Justin Tafa knock him out, who's also a slow heavyweight. We saw he get knocked out by Mario Pinto as well. This guy's been knocked out 3 times in less than 2 years. And now he's taken on Petrino, who's a 205-pounder coming up. A guy that has been known in the past for his knockout power. And also can wrestle too. If Vitor Petrino comes in here with a striking style and idea, I think he is actually going to go out there and knock out Austen Lane on the feet in this fight. Now, maybe Vitor Petrino wants to use his wrestling and test it out against a big heavyweight because Lane is 6'6". He's a big guy. He can wrestle. We saw that against Rebellis de Spain, of course, who come into the UFC with a lot of hype and then never lived up to it, unfortunately. But now he's at Karate Combat, just kind of killing people. So I guess that's fun for him. But Vitor Petrino, I think he knocks out Austen Lane here. I would be interested if he comes into this one with a wrestling matchup. Wrestling game plan, I apologize. I think if he goes into this one with a striking game plan, though, I think he is going to find the chin. I think that Austen Lane at this point, his chin is probably toast. And another thing as well, as I did say, he just does not really leave the pocket once he throws his own strike. So I think that Petrino catches him on a counter and knocks him out. And now in the co-main event, we have Stephen Wonderboy Thompson taking on Gabriel Bonfim. And I think that this is honestly very odd matchmaking. When I saw this fight get made, I honestly thought to myself, so that's what you're going to be doing with Wonderboy now? And I also thought to myself, oh, so that's who Bonfim's going to be fighting next? Because although Bonfim is minus 400, I don't want you guys to forget about this. He lost to a very similar stylistic matchup in Nicholas Dalby only a year and 7 months ago. Dalby, what is he good at? Karate, striking. What is Wonderboy's entire game? karate striking. It's literally all Wonderboy does is strike in the karate sort of stance, right? And Bonfim, honestly, he struggled with that style against Dalby. It was more so he just couldn't really finish Dalby, and he kind of quit once the going got a little bit tough. If you really wanted to be critical, but Dalby still with a very similar stylistic ability to Thompson at a lower level found the success there. And honestly, I will be honest, I said honest twice, but anyway, Chaos Williams, a win over Chaos Williams by submission, doesn't really look that impressive after a guy like Andreas Gustafsson come in there on short notice and out wrestled Chaos Williams for 15 minutes. But Chaos was the one that took him on short notice. Stephen Thompson, he's on a bit of a rough run. You know, he's 42 years old. I can forgive the run that he's been on because he has been taking on all comers. He took on the former champion Bilal Muhammad. He took on the former title challenger Gilbert Burns. He took on Shavkat Rakhmonov. He took on Joaquin Buckley. He's been taking on the young up-and-coming guys, and he's been doing it now for 4 years straight at the age of 38 to 42. And I can forgive a lot of those losses there. But he's doing it again. He's taking on another 27-year-old surging prospect out of Brazil. At one point, undefeated 15-0. A guy with a lot of hype behind him. And I think probably could potentially regain all of that hype if he can do what I think he's going to do against Stephen Thompson, which I think is he's going to clinch against Thompson. And I'm not even kidding, guys. I think he's going to pull guillotine on Stephen Thompson in the clinch. He's done it before. I think he's going to do it again. I genuinely believe it. I think as long as the fight is on the feet, I really, really don't like Bonfim in this matchup stylistically because Thompson does strike from range so well. We've seen Bonfim get hit on the feet before by multiple different opponents. Even before he really kind of went on his run, Munir Laziz caught him on the feet, right? And we've also seen him put in a guillotine by Trey Waters before, but, you know, like, Stephen Thompson's not going to do that. But I just think that minus 400, I don't love the price tag. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm saying I'm picking Bonfim, but I just don't love the price tag. I really don't. I think that Bonfim, though, and I'm not even kidding, is going to just clinch Thompson, pull guillotine. As long as the fight's on the feet, Thompson's going to be live, though, man. I feel like Thompson actually is going to be the minute winner in this fight, but it's just going to come down to when Bonfim gets that finish, because I know Bonfim's a good boxer. I know he's got a professional boxing background, and, you know, he does use it quite well in the UFC. In fact, I think he does it better than Ismail Bonfim, who I think Ismail Bonfim's real entire game is the striking, whereas with Gabriel, it's definitely more the BJJ, but I just don't love the striking for Bonfim. I think Bonfim just subs him with a guillotine. He pulls guillotine on Thompson in the clinch. That's what I'm going with. I'll see you guys in the main event, I guess. And now we can move on to the main event of the evening after that incredibly awkward breakdown of the co-main. The main event, of course, is Derrick Lewis versus Tallison Teixeira. For Derrick Lewis, it's not a hometown fight necessarily, but he definitely is going to be the more so hometown guy in this fight. So I feel like this is kind of like Derrick Lewis's main event. However, maybe the UFC is trying to use his name to build up their new potential star, Tallison Teixeira, who is 8-0 and only has fought in the UFC once for 35 seconds when he just destroyed Justin Tafa in the clinch. Now, he did set it up with a head kick and a right hand and then clinched it up, and then he got the big elbow, which finished off the fight. But Tallison Teixeira, only 35 seconds of octagon time in the UFC, and he's now headlining an event in front of a crowd in enemy territory as well. So I'm very intrigued to see how he does look in this matchup, because if he does beat Derrick Lewis, he could kind of be like the new sort of Sergey Pavlovich, potentially, of this UFC division, UFC heavyweight division. The problems that I do have about Teixeira are he's only ever fought in the first round. His career has never made it into the second round, aside from a modified rules kickboxing matchup, which I guess is pretty interesting, but he's never seen the second round, and this is a 5-round fight potentially if it goes there. And another thing as well about Teixeira too is he does use his range very well at 6'7" with an 83-inch reach, but we have seen him throw away that advantage before on the Contender Series against Arthur Lopez. Arthur Lopez is just not good at all, and Tallison Teixeira kind of abandoned the tools that he's good at, and he just threw down and he brawled with Arthur Lopez, and that scares me, because if you do that against Derrick Lewis, I think he's the one that would actually come off second best. The thing about Teixeira, though, is he is 6'7" with an 87-inch reach, and quite uniquely, he actually uses those tools to his advantage. You never really see guys this tall with this much reach actually be able to use these abilities. Typically, guys just don't really fight in the way that they should, and Teixeira is one of those guys that does. He throws a lot of straight shots. He even throws head kicks at heavyweight because he's 6'7". He can do that. He can get away with it. And he uses his size well. We saw him use his size to bully Justin Tafa up against the cage, land a massive elbow as well up against the cage as well, and knock out Justin Tafa in only 35 seconds. But as I said, I do worry about him a little bit. That lack of experience could haunt him here because Derrick Lewis has 40 professional fights, many of those in the UFC, 29 of those in the UFC, and he does have main event experience as well. He went to Brazil on short notice and he fought against Jailton Almeida in that fight. He had a main event in the Apex against Rodrigo Nascimento in his last fight, and he was wrestling in that fight. He got one takedown against Nascimento, if I'm not misunderstood. And I do believe, honestly, for Derrick Lewis, that shooting a takedown would be a smart idea in round one. Like, why not? We don't know what Tallison Teixeira's wrestling and grappling looks like. It might be terrible. It might be quite good, but it might be terrible. And I think that if you're Derrick Lewis, I think you take that chance. Why not clinch up against Teixeira and try and take him down? I think that's a very, very good way to maybe even sap on the gas tank a little bit, make him think a little bit more, and then you can work maybe in the second and the third round for a KO. Because I'm seeing a lot of people, I think nearly everybody, is expecting this fight to end in the first round. And it probably will. Let's be honest, it probably will. But what if it doesn't? Tallison Teixeira has never seen round two. He's never seen it. And I think that Derrick Lewis can fight a smart fight, and he just avoids a brawl with Teixeira, and he avoids kind of just fighting from range with Teixeira, and he closes the distance, and he attempts a takedown. I think that Lewis can get those takedowns. We've never seen Teixeira taken down, I don't think. And I think that in this matchup, I think it would be smart for Lewis to do so. I'm picking Lewis. He's the underdog. He's plus 170. I can't justify picking Teixeira, who's only fought once in the UFC, who showed some weaknesses on the Contender Series against Derrick Lewis, who I know is old. I know he's 40 years old. I know he hasn't fought for a long time. But at the same time, he beat Rodrigo Nascimento. You know, he beat Marcos Rogério de Lima by knockout in 30 seconds. If you want to go way back in the day, even knocked out Curtis Blades. Pretty good wins. Pretty good wins. I feel like this is just a really, really tough matchup to call, because if Tallison Teixeira does win in the first round, it would be kind of like an, oh, wow, I really should have seen that coming. But at the same time, I like the underdog opportunity on Derrick Lewis here, because I believe if he does mix it up, I really do believe if he mixes it up, he can make something happen in the later rounds. I really, really do believe if Lewis wants to take down, I think he probably gets it. Let me know what you think, though, in the comments below. Am I crazy for thinking Lewis is going to attempt takedowns, or am I not? I'll see you guys in the next one.